So, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, happy International Earth Day to all of you. Here we are at Pune Knowledge Cluster Sust-En Open Public Talk Series. PKC sustainability and environmental initiatives are focused towards making Pune resilient in terms of food, water, and livelihood. Achievements of this goal need increasing vegetation cover, food, water, and livelihood securities, which can eventually help in climate change mitigation. This also helps in multiple other ways, such as increased carbon storage, reduced emissions of GHGs, and supporting industries. PKC Sust-En Talk series consists of public talks such as today's, focus group discussions and workshops with experts in the environment and sustainability sector. Through this series, we aim to promote collaborations, co-creations of technologies, and conceptualization of city-scale projects to solve key issues related to carbon emissions, wastewater management, and improving air quality with green energy production. So on today's Earth Day occasion, where the theme is Invest in Our Planet, we have a special speaker with us, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. The topic of today's discussion is carbon accounting for investing in a safe future on Earth. Giving brief introduction about Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, she got her doctorate in physics from University of Pune and is a founder director of Samuchit Envirotech, a social green enterprise promoting environmentally sustainable lifestyle products and services since 2005. In a career spanning for more than 25 years now, she has developed and promoted decentralized organic waste to fuel technologies. She has also invented an easy-to-use Samuchit carbon footprint calculator for citizens, and she conducts workshops on climate-friendly lifestyle, sustainable urbanization. She is a co-founder of Orja Box LLP, a green startup that was formed in 2021. She is a founding member and on board of directors of Clean Energy Access Network, a registered society in India, and serves on the governing and advisory bodies of many national, international organizations. She is also the national convener of Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, INECC. She teaches courses on sustainability, physics, and the big history, that is history of the universe, at Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts, SSLA in Pune. Her work has been honored by various national and international awards and accolades. With that being said, I hand over the session to Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Disha. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much, PKC, for giving me this opportunity to interact on a topic which I hope is of interest to many of you who are in the audience today. From the perspective of building a safe future on Earth and also a safe future in terms of career paths for young people. So I'm sure everyone is now aware that with industrialization driven by fossil fuels, we humans on planet Earth initiated a process by which we are adding greenhouse gases to the Earth's atmosphere. Greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide is one of them, but there are several others. These are gas molecules which are capable of capturing and holding thermal energy in the Earth's atmosphere, and as a result, as we are adding over and above whatever the natural greenhouse gas proportion is there in the atmosphere, over and above that, as our industrial processes have added additional greenhouse gases, we are seeing that the average temperature of planet Earth has been going up. This process was kicked off with the industrialization, but we sort of became aware of it in around 1950s. Since then, there has been a discussion, there has been an effort as to how do we control this phenomenon, how do we avoid further warming from happening. And we see today that we are actually in the middle of a climate crisis. How do we resolve it? What are the tools that are in our hands? Carbon accounting can be one of the processes which will lead us perhaps towards solving this crisis. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Just to give you a sense of where things are as far as climate change is concerned at this point in time, carbon dioxide percentage in the atmosphere was around 250 parts per million before industrialization. And that meant that the average temperature of Earth was around 13.7 degrees centigrade at that time. Please understand that this is not the temperature of any one location. It is a mathematical calculation. You basically think about the annual average temperature of every location on the planet, take the average of these annual averages, and that is the kind of a number that we are talking about here. It is a measure of the overall global climatic condition. In the 2020s, we see that collectively all greenhouse gases together, the carbon dioxide percentage in the atmosphere equivalently is about 415 ppm, parts per million. With this change, the average temperature of the planet has already increased by more than 1 degree centigrade, and we have already started seeing the various impacts that are coming because of this. We see even the changes in the weather cycles. Right now there is a warning of heat waves across South Asia. The same thing happened last year. So this is a phenomenon that we are increasingly going to see. Seawater level is increasing, land is getting submerged, so all of these impacts are already being triggered by this 1.1 degree centigrade increase that has happened at this point in time. What has been the effort so far to address this challenge? The first international effort was what is called as the Kyoto Agreement. This was an agreement among all the countries which are part of a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is a UN body of which all the nations are members, and they all collectively decided that this is what we are going to do in order to address this problem. The agreement was signed in 1997, and the operational period was 2005 to 2012. What was decided in this agreement, it was quite interesting that at that point in time, there were about 37 countries which could be considered as industrialized or developed countries. And it was decided that these countries will solve this problem, because ultimately these are the countries which have done most of the use of fossil fuels has happened in these countries, and therefore they are the ones responsible for the additional greenhouse gases that have gone into the atmosphere. And therefore the mandate was given to these countries that you figure out what was your emission in 1990, take a number which is 5% below that, and that is the emission level, annual emission from the country that you have to get to by 2012, by putting in place various measures to reduce your fossil fuel use, improve energy efficiency. You do whatever you need to do in order to get to that stage. One of the mechanisms which was allowed in this case is what is called as the carbon market. In this, the idea was that because climate change is a global phenomenon, it doesn't really matter where the emissions are getting reduced. As long as they are getting reduced, it is going to have a positive impact. And therefore, if a developed industrialized country finds it hard to reduce its own within country emissions, it had the option to fund projects elsewhere in the world, in the developing world more precisely, which will create an infrastructure, energy infrastructure, or maybe forestation and things like that, which will reduce emissions. But because the money has come out of this industrialized country, it will be taken as the emission reduction of that country and not physically, geographically, where the emission reduction has happened. This was supposed to also therefore fund developing countries to move on a path of low carbon development. So on paper, this seemed like a very good idea, a win-win situation. Unfortunately, it all failed. All the developed countries, none of them could actually achieve the targets that were set. The carbon market also collapsed when it became very clear that this process is not really going to meet the goal that the Kyoto Agreement had set for itself. So this was a huge disappointment for everyone. But in all this discussion and publicity around efforts by global governments and United Nations, this whole discussion sort of overshadows another interesting process that was triggered by Kyoto Agreement. What happened is, because of Kyoto, the discourse on climate change sort of became public in the developed countries, and it was pretty obvious that who are the culprits, who are the causes of these emissions. It is generally the industries which are heavily relying on use of fossil fuels, and therefore the shareholders, the investors, the customers of industries started putting pressure on the business world that the governments may or may not do whatever they are expected to do, but since it is pretty obvious that you are the guys who are using fossil fuels, you should focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions on your own, irrespective of what is happening in the government effort. Now, governments typically, and all industrialized countries are democratic governments, so they tend to move very slowly, and very disruptive policies are never really brought in. So that inherently put a limitation on how much they could do, and the market mechanism also wasn't really succeeding. But many industries, progressive, forward-looking industries, sort of stepped forward, and a voluntary effort was generated by industries and NGOs working together. And this particularly happened from 2000s onwards. Many businesses started voluntarily disclosing their annual carbon emissions, and therefore they sort of took on the moral responsibility on themselves that every year their emissions should go down. Some mechanisms came up which started rewarding and recognizing these downward trends. So this was an entirely voluntary process. But in order to make this happen, this process sort of took up some of the methodologies that were developed by the carbon market. Because in the market mechanism, if somebody is going to pay for emission reduction, then that payer will want a proof that emissions have actually been reduced. And therefore, a number of methodologies were being developed to be able to measure and account for emission reductions. The same methodologies were sort of used as the basis, but when industries and businesses started applying these methodologies to themselves, they did make some small changes in that. And through this sort of a collaborative effort, several tools started emerging. Today, the most widely accepted process is what is called as the Corporate Accounting and Reporting Standard, or the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. This maps 7 greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, consistency in the accounting process, and transparency of the accounting process. These are some of the fundamentals that this tool has stuck to, and it has evolved in various interesting ways. The tool is still evolving. From time to time, suggestions are invited, improvements are being made. So this is a sort of an evolving process, but more or less the basic framework is now set and well accepted. So this is a tool that in a way I look at it as an unintended but positive consequence of Kyoto Protocol. After the failure of Kyoto Protocol, the UN level discussions sort of went a bit haywire in between, but ultimately once again regrouping was done, and Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015. This is in a way the second global attempt at addressing climate change, and possibly this will be the last attempt, because if we fail at this, then we are most likely heading towards a civilizational collapse. So one doesn't know what will happen to the UN itself in that process. So Paris Agreement is a much more long term, has a much more long term vision than the Kyoto Agreement. It was supposed to be operational from 2021, but because of COVID pandemic, the timeline was shifted ahead, and it has become operational from 2022. The idea behind this agreement is radically different from the Kyoto Agreement. Here, the responsibility of reducing emissions is on everybody, on all countries, rich or poor, industrialized or developing or whatever. And how much effort each country has to put in has to be decided by that country itself. So there are voluntary pledges that are to be made or that have been made by all the countries, and it is hoped that collectively these pledges will take us towards a goal. The goal is that the temperature rise by 2100 should be kept well below 2 degrees centigrade. That was the original wording in Paris Agreement. That has slowly now changed to, I mean, everybody has accepted the scientific reality that in order to really safeguard humanity on Earth, we have to limit the temperature rise by 2100 to around 1.5 degrees centigrade. And remember, I already told you that in 2020s, we have reached 1.1 degrees centigrade increase already. And our limit for 2100, that is about 80 years from now, is 1.5 degrees centigrade. So that's the long-term target as far as Paris Agreement is concerned. The pledges, these voluntary pledges that the countries make are for 5-year period typically, and it is expected that every 5 years, in fact every year, there is an expectation that countries will make some new pledge, but every 5 years there will be a stock taking, and based on that it will be expected that more ambitious goals will be set by individual countries. So even though let's say the current pledges that are on the table may not be taking us towards 1.5 degrees centigrade, it may be overshooting, but the hope is that by 2030 countries will become more bold, more ambitious, and they will come up collectively with strategies which will sort of start slowing down the global warming, and we will be able to meet the long term target. That is the ultimate hope there. So this is the regime in which we are operating right now. So as I already explained, there is this huge difference between the Kyoto framework and the Paris framework. Kyoto framework was imposed on these 37 countries. The approach was very rigid. The target was also set for them by the UN body, whereas under Paris Agreement it is voluntary, but it is for all countries, and the approach is more flexible. In a way, the Paris Agreement is unfair to the developing countries, because if you look at the total additional greenhouse gas emissions that have gone into the atmosphere so far, what are called as the cumulative greenhouse gas emissions by humans since the Industrial Revolution, in that, the big share is from the industrialized countries, because they have been emitting since 1850s. The developing countries started emitting only now. For example, India's share in the cumulative emissions that have gone into the atmosphere so far is only 3%, even though right now we are the third or fourth largest emitter in the annual, as far as the annual carbon emissions as on today is concerned. So today we are one of the big emitters, but collectively, the climate change that has been caused at this point of time, our contribution is that in only 3%. And yet it is expected that our contribution to solving this problem should be as much as the contribution of, let's say, the European Union or the United States, which have a much bigger share in as creators of the problem to start with. But that is what everybody ultimately has agreed on, and that is the framework under which we are operating right now. Where is this all taking us? This picture I have taken from Climate Action Tracker, and they will keep on updating it as time passes by. But it's an interesting graphic if you see it carefully. Here, the pre-industrial average temperature of the planet is scaled to 0 degrees centigrade. So we are looking only at the increase over and above what should be naturally the average temperature of the planet. Right now, we are here. This is 2022 data. So if you can see my cursor, we are almost at 1.2 degrees centigrade warming. Paris Agreement ultimate goal is 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, current policies, whatever the governments are currently actually doing across the world, that is collectively taking us towards a world that will be about 3 degrees centigrade warmer by 2100. If you look at all the pledges that countries have made at this point in time under Paris Agreement, these are called nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. So if you sum up all the NDCs and assume that all the targets will actually be met, which in itself is a bit uncertain, but let us be optimistic. So assuming that all the targets are met, we are still going to be very close to 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade warmer. If we look at the long-term pledges that people have made, countries have given targets up to around 2030 or so in a in more concrete terms. But there are also pledges made like we will go carbon neutral by 2040 or 50, or in India's case 2070. So if all those pledges are also added in, we are headed towards a 2 degree centigrade warmer world, which was the sort of the original target under Paris Agreement. Looking at things very optimistically, that everything that everybody is committing to officially or unofficially is all collected together, and assuming that all of that happens, then even then we are not at this point in time getting to 1.5 degrees centigrade. We are expected to go to 1.8 to 2 degrees centigrade. So that's the current scenario. But as I said, the expectation is that once the 2030 targets are met, and by that time new technologies will be in place, there will be more awareness among public, which will make it possible or enable democratic governments to take bolder steps. If all of that happens, then more ambitious targets will be set, and we can keep on pulling down this line towards 1.5 degrees centigrade. So this is where the current scenario is. Now let's talk a bit about India. This was all the global scenario. In the Indian context, we have a very unique dilemma. There are countries in the world who are big emitters of greenhouse gases, but they are not suffering so much consequence. On the other hand, mostly tropical countries, African countries particularly, they are extremely climate vulnerable, but they are not contributing much to the problem at all. Now, India is one of those countries which is currently a major greenhouse gas emitter, in the sense that we are currently contributing sizably to the problem, but at the same time we are also extremely climate vulnerable. We have we are in fact considered to be the top 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change impacts. The interesting part is that the population group that is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions is typically urban, industrial kind of people, which are medium and high income group people in India. Most of us in this webinar would be in this group. We are contributing to the problem. But who is going to be impacted the most by climate impacts? These will be farmers, fishing communities, tribal populations, and urban low income groups. So that sort of creates a challenge for the policymakers. There are this whole, and these are the majority of voiceless people who do not have much of a political clout, but they are going to pay the price of climate change. But who is responsible for climate change? That is an entirely different population group which has a lot of political and social clout, and is in a position to drive national policies, and they are benefiting by these emissions, and that is why they are indulging in the emissions. So how do you resolve this dilemma? That is one of the big challenge for the policymakers in the Indian context. With that background, if you look at India's commitment to Paris Agreement, the original commitment made in 2015 has been revised in 2022. This commitment is typically considered to be compatible with the original 2 degree centigrade target of Paris Agreement. One announcement was made by India that we will go carbon neutral by 2070. Interestingly, this has not been put in the official NDC document, but that is the sort of the long term vision. What is there in the NDC document? And everywhere, at every point, it has been mentioned that we will achieve this subject to availability of climate finance. That means there is an expectation that somebody, and it is the developed world that is expected to do that. It is the developed world that will provide the money to make this happen. So we want to reduce our emissions per GDP by about 45%. Non-fossil power generation should rise to 50% of the total electricity generation. About 2.5 to 3 billion ton carbon dioxide equivalent sequestration is to be achieved through forestation. And the fourth point is something which was introduced in 2022, which is called mass movement on lifestyle for environment. So the idea here is that individual citizens will take some onus on themselves to reduce overall emissions through lifestyle changes. That is what that fourth point is about. So this is what India is proposing to do, and typically it is expected to achieve this by 2025 to 2030. That is the kind of a timeline that has been stated. In addition to that, what has happened, and this is not just a phenomenon in India, but it is happening across the world. But after India said that we will go carbon neutral by 2070, Indian businesses and organizations also started coming forward and putting up their own voluntary commitments to go carbon neutral by certain dates. Now, if a business is making that kind of a commitment, it is going to need something to support its claim. So, for example, if a business says that we are going to go carbon neutral in 2030, then every year they should show evidence that they are actually moving in that direction. And in 2030, they can't just make an announcement that we have become carbon neutral. They'll have to support that claim with some kind of a proof. So, which means that within these organizations, they will need to customize the carbon accounting tools and start doing accounting of their own activities. Beyond 2030, what is likely to happen as far as India's commitment is concerned? Once you have got to a stage, I mean, the biggest one can say the low hanging fruit as far as reducing emissions is concerned is shifting from, let's say, coal fired power plants to renewable energy, because economically also that makes sense at this point in time. Generating electricity using renewable energy is now cheaper than generating electricity using coal. So once you get to a stage where 50% of your power generation is coming from renewable energy, increasing that beyond that level is going to be more and more difficult. So once that supply side shift is saturated, it is quite likely that the NDC also will start looking at the demand side, how the electricity and other fossil energy is being used. And the easy target for governments is businesses, because as it is, there are processes, it is mandatory for businesses to submit financial accounting to the government annually. So it is quite likely that the next NDC may include a component like this, that we will impose carbon accounting as a statutory requirement for some industries, at least some of the most energy intensive industries. And if those industries are seen to be reducing their emissions or moving towards carbon neutrality, there will have to be some kind of a reward given to them. There is already a lot of brainstorming going on, and in principle the Indian government has agreed to initiate a carbon market within the country. So the international carbon market is where polluting industries in developed countries fund projects in developing countries. But within a country itself, a polluting industry can fund some emission reducing activity within the country itself. So that kind of a carbon market can get initiated. Carbon tax is another instrument with which industries may be motivated to shift towards low carbon or zero carbon energy processes, and so on and so forth. So this is something which is likely to happen. Interestingly, in some of the NDCs from a few European countries, this type of a feature is already there. They have already said that certain industries, it is mandatory for them to reduce their emission by a certain percentage by a certain date. And of course, that will have to be tracked. So what I am saying is not just speculation in air, it is something which has already reflected in the NDCs of those countries which feel that they have reached saturation as far as renewable energy installations are concerned, and have started looking at the use of energy. So it is not very unrealistic to expect that the same thing will come into India's commitment. Another thing which can come into the commitments and is increasingly also the focus internationally is removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Technologies are being developed. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has already said that looking at the current efforts and looking at the current technology developments, just shifting away from fossil fuels is not going to be adequate to meet the goal of Paris Agreement. we will have to not just stop current emissions or slow down current emissions, we will also have to start removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, again, in this case also, how much carbon was removed, that you can't just make claims on that. It will have to be supported by evidence. So accounting processes are needed for carbon sequestration also. So this is where we are at right now. I feel that we are going in this direction where carbon accounting will become a standard practice, as standard as financial accounting, which also means that there will be a high demand for carbon accountants and carbon auditors. Right now, we have a dearth of such expertise. We also, I mean, apart from specialized accountants and auditors, in general, uh, professionals will need to have some level of literacy about carbon accounting, so that they will understand what the carbon accountants and auditors are talking about. What is the kind of data that is required to do the accounting properly? So, in general, there is a need for increasing literacy around carbon accounting in order to make this path of solution towards climate change effective, and to be self-sufficient to be able to implement these kind of solutions. So that is why I feel that young people today should really seriously consider this as a career option and start acquiring information, learning about what is the framework of carbon accounting and how they can implement that under various circumstances. I feel that these are the various entities that will very soon start looking for people who have acquired the knowledge and skill of doing carbon accounting. Over and above this, apart from whether the government will make it mandatory or not, it also makes sense even from a conventional perspective. I mean, if you are going to, I mean, looking at the economics of using fossil energy versus renewable energy right now, if you get into a process which is going to increasingly reduce your dependence on fossil energy, you are going to save money. So ultimately, even if you don't believe in climate change and want to run your business in a very conventional thinking, even then it makes sense to try and track where the carbon emissions are coming from and try to reduce them as much as possible. It will allow businesses and organizations also to develop their own green branding in that sense. Now, of course, there may be a thought process that is it something that is going to be like Y2K, where for a short period there is this whole need for a particular skill and then it's going to die down. So I just want to mention it here that carbon neutrality is not the end, but it's the beginning. What is carbon neutrality? In carbon neutrality, you try to reduce your carbon emissions and then balance them by carbon removal, so that the end result is a zero carbon footprint. But then there is a next step that you can go towards. Once you attain carbon neutrality, you can become more ambitious and decide that forget about carbon removal, I want to make my carbon emissions themselves zero. So that is a zero carbon target that one can set. And then moving on from there, one can also think about going carbon negative, where you maintain the zero emissions and also start investing in carbon removal, so that your accounts book will show a negative balance. You are removing rather than putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So this is a sort of a journey that businesses and organizations can start thinking about. We will need many sectors to move along this path if we have to achieve the Paris Agreement target and also go beyond. I mean, it's not going to happen that by 2100 you get to 1.5 degrees and that's the end of it. The temperatures will keep on increasing. So even in the 22nd century, we will need to keep on doing the effort to maintain the greenhouse gas emissions lower. Just to give you a sense of what is carbon accounting, This is the typical framework that is followed. The measures are called scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is direct use of fossil fuels on location of your premises. Scope 2 is use of energy carriers. So electricity is the main one in most cases. Scope 3 is the interesting one because it contains all the indirect and all the energy consumption that happens in outsourced processes. And therefore, it is more difficult to estimate. Scope 1 and scope 2 can be very accurately calculated. So the carbon accounting framework of today says that scope 1 and scope 2 has to be measured. Scope 3 is optional. But that has created a loophole. Just to give you an example, suppose as a business, I own a fleet of vehicles. Then all the emissions from petrol, diesel use of those vehicles come under scope 1. I have to measure them, I have to report them. So I sell off all my vehicles and I hire a contractor to provide me with vehicles whenever I need them. Then suddenly all those emissions become scope 3 emissions, which I don't need to measure, I don't need to report, and therefore my emissions haven't really reduced, but I can claim carbon neutrality. So those kind of loopholes we have to start plugging in, and therefore there's a lot of brainstorming going on right now. How do we ensure that scope 3 also gets reported as much as possible? So this is, as I said, the accounting is also evolving. Another thing which is currently not there in the accounting framework is there is no universally accepted process for measuring the carbon sequestration, the sinks, the carbon sinks. So that is something which has to be brought in as more and more entities invest in carbon sequestration. And the offsets. Now, if you are in this long journey of 40-50 years of going towards carbon neutrality, you need to also keep an account of what are the measures that you have already put in place to avoid double counting of the same offset measures again and again. So those frameworks also still need to be developed. So that is where things are at, and I hope I have given you a flavor of what carbon accounting is, where it is going, and why it is necessary. Just to highlight some of the things that I am personally involved in, as was mentioned in my introduction, I developed a personal carbon footprint calculator. This calculator is now available as a web app on this website, climatetora.com. There is a teaser calculation that you can do about your vehicle, but if you create your account, it's an entirely free access calculator, but you have to create your login, password, etc., and then the whole calculator can be accessed, and you can keep track how your personal emissions are changing as you evolve your lifestyle. So this is one resource that you can use to get a personal flavor of your own carbon accounting. It uses a slightly different framework than the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, etc., but it gives you a fairly good estimate of what is your contribution to climate change problem. But over and above that, I have also designed a basic carbon accounting course. This course is not focused on any particular carbon accounting tool or anything like that. There are courses which teach how to use the tools, but then you sort of mechanically just do step 1, step 2, step 3. What we are focusing in this course is to develop a basic framework, basic understanding of the principles of carbon accounting, so that you can develop and evolve your own customized tools to meet your objectives. It will also give you an aptitude, a sense of whether you have an aptitude for a career in carbon accounting. This course is also available on Climatora. This is a paid course, so please go to the website and check out all the information about it. I don't want to get into the advertising mode here. Um, Ideally, anyone and everyone should and must learn the basic principles, but if you have these type of qualifications, it will be relatively easier. You will either understand the logic of the calculation better, or you will understand the accounting techniques better. The other part is what you will have to spend effort and time on learning. Another interesting process that we initiated, and now I have joined hands with PKC to take this forward, and I'm really very excited about this. This is a methodology which we call carbon neutral campus. This was originally developed as a part of Yuva Drushti process of Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change. It's a participatory process. It is directed towards academic campuses, and our idea is that I mean, there are academic campuses can go carbon neutral without involving students and faculty at all, and in many cases the consultant driven carbon neutrality processes are operating like that. You hire somebody, that person comes, looks at your campus, suggests some technological retrofits, and that's it. But if an academic campus is going carbon neutral, that's a tremendous opportunity for education. And that is why we develop this process in a slightly different manner. We ask the campus to put together a team which comprises of all the stakeholders, students, faculty members, administrative staff also. As experts, we provide only guidance and mentoring. We sort of handhold the team to do carbon accounting of its own campus and come up with its own plan for going carbon neutral, and then start putting in place that plan. The plan in that this case may involve behavioral or procedural changes and technological retrofits. So it's a combination of both of these. Now what this does is, in the immediate impact is that the thought process of carbon accounting gets embedded in the organizational decision making. So it's not like somebody is just helicoptering in and implementing a solution. Also, a climate aligned work culture evolves on the campus, and the students are sort of first hand experiencing this. The long term impact is, of course, the campus will go carbon neutral based on the timeline that the team develops. But more importantly, the outgoing students will take this work culture of climate aligned thinking to their work spaces. So this process, by focusing on academic campuses, we hope that we will be triggering transformational change in other sectors also. And from that perspective, we are a very small group at Samuchit Envirotech. So we started doing this process a few years back, to our best, to the best of our ability, but we couldn't really move forward much. But we have now joined hands with PKC, and we hope that collectively we can really take this process forward in a very, very impactful manner. Please stay tuned. Next week we will be releasing a short video which highlights and gives you a better sense of what we are planning to do with this carbon neutral campus process. Um, so I'll stop here. I'm of course happy to answer questions right now, but these are my contact details. You can also contact me later if you have any specific queries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. That was a really informative and engaging session that we had. We already have some questions in the chat box. I'll read them one by one. Okay.
Sure.
Yes. So Jinisha Suvarna asks, how is carbon accounting and sustainability interrelated in terms of additional incentives?
So sustainability is even a broader concept compared to climate change and carbon accounting. Sustainability is about all planetary resources. How do we use them judiciously and not cross over the planetary boundaries? One of the planetary boundaries is climate change. One of the resources is fossil fuels. So in that sense, what I am talking about is a sort of a subset of sustainability. Um, eh, So if you take ecological footprint as the measure of sustainability, then carbon footprint is a big chunk of the ecological footprint. That is what we are addressing through these processes. So I hope that answers your question.
Right. Okay. Okay, Swapnil has a compliment, very nice and informative session. More
Thank you.
people are thanking you for the wonderful session. Then Apurva Barve asks, how is the carbon footprint and resource footprint of renewable energy sources calculated? Does carbon accounting take into account these factors?
I think you are referring to the all the uh, claims around battery recycling and what happens to solar cells after they reach their lifetime and so on. So we have to realize that no technological solution is going to be perfect from the word go. If we see solution to a problem, a reasonable solution, we need to start implementing it. What is important is to be upfront about its limitations and continue working on those limitations. I think we have to realize this. And this is the fundamental difference between fossil fuel industry and the renewable energy industry. Fossil fuel industry knew about climate change in 1950s. They spend a lot of money and effort to hide that information and to continue creating an impression that they are only positive impacts, there are no negative impacts. Whereas the renewable energy has been upfront that yes, there are these problems, and therefore funding and investment in research and development has continued to solve these problems. And that is why we have seen over the years that the costs of renewable energy systems have gone down. The some of the issues around like for example, earlier it was lead acid batteries. Now we are using better battery systems. Lithium, by the way, is 100% recyclable. So we just need to put in place the infrastructure to collect lithium batteries and recycle that. So technologically it is not really a problem. It is a problem because the policies are not moving fast enough. So one has to understand and qualify this. The solar cells also, even if you throw them out, what is going to happen at the most? It is silicon is the most abundant element in our geography. It is not it is fairly benign. It doesn't produce any it doesn't like get accumulated as like mercury and lead poisoning and so on and so forth. So one has to be a bit more pragmatic about these issues. Yes, there was a time when the energy that went into building a solar PV system was more than the energy that was extracted or that was delivered by the system over its lifetime. That is no longer the case. Already the carbon emissions incurred by the existing solar infrastructure has been more compensated for already. There is also another thing which I would like to mention here, and this is coming from the book Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, where he mentions that we should treat the earth's resources as as if it is a capital investment and not use it for our running expenses. So basically, if I have 1 liter of petrol, using it to go from point A to point B is not the right use for it, but using it to make a solar cell which will give me energy for the next 15 years is the right use for it. So these are also thoughts that you have to keep in mind.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we have also some queries about campuses getting accounted for carbon emissions. So we have put the email address in the chat box. Kindly, if there are faculty members or students who would be interested into getting such studies done for their campuses towards making a greener campus, please get in touch with us. There was also the last slide by Dr. Karve. We will also be putting the recording of this session on YouTube, so you can go back, share this with your colleagues and friends and get back to us. There is another question by Chetan Kothavade. How carbon footprints are linked with plastic footprint? how recycling would be the solution?
So plastic is made from petroleum. So there is a carbon footprint associated with manufacturing of plastic and also disposal of plastic. It is possible to estimate that. And if you recycle plastic, you are going to reduce those carbon emissions. So that is a fairly straightforward process that is already available.
Right. Poonam Dharkar asks, how do we account for the carbon impact of reused and recycled items? Also, the impact of hyper-local movement within neighborhoods as compared to the long distance traveling within the city. This should be looked at from the context of shopping, working, and such everyday chores or activities.
Yeah, so recycling is always better because that means additional resources do not have to come out from the earth. You keep on using the resources which have already been harvested. As much as you can prolong it, that is better. But beyond the point, you will have to focus on getting the, especially in the context of plastic. If you keep on using it till it disintegrates, then you are actually going to create a bigger problem, because then these microscopic plastic particles will spread everywhere. So some judiciousness is required there. Regarding the other issue about transport and mobility in the city, we must build our cities to be walking and cycling friendly. There is no other option. The next one priority should be for public transport. And then if you have to do something which goes beyond these three systems, then and then only you should take out your own vehicle. If we create that kind of a culture and that kind of a city infrastructure, then the city's carbon footprint will definitely go down drastically, and everybody's health will also improve drastically.
Yeah, so it's a win-win for all in that case, right? Samir Kanabargi asks, can we consider biomass as carbon neutral?
Biomass is carbon neutral provided the green cover remains intact. So the rate at which you are harvesting biomass from an ecosystem, that is the key there. Because even trees are dying or shedding leaves, shedding their branches and so on. If these are not used for anything, these materials ultimately decompose and all the carbon goes back into the atmosphere. That is the natural carbon cycle. Instead of that, if you pick up this material and use it for generating some energy, you would have replaced a fossil energy with this energy, and what carbon is going back in the atmosphere is the natural carbon cycle component only. It is not a additional carbon dioxide going in the atmosphere. So under those conditions, biomass is carbon neutral.
Understood. Okay. Oh, we have so many questions. Okay, sorry. Poonam meant, can we put numbers to these activities, such as reusing travel? So I think she means accounting for such activities.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely possible.
Yeah, right. Okay, so on that note, what Poonam has asked and what Dr. Karve was also saying, as she mentioned that we have this carbon neutral carbon emission calculator, which is already there openly available on the website. And we also have this initiative where PKC and Samuchit Envirotech has come together to to raise awareness as well as to make your campus healthier and greener by doing carbon neutral campus studies. So I would also like to mention another point here, that the NAC accreditation system, it rewards the green initiatives within educational institutions, and this program can be an effective way to start such effort, the carbon neutral campus program. And us at Pune Knowledge Cluster and Samuchit Envirotech being enablers, we can help educational institutions towards finding customized solutions for achieving carbon neutrality for their campus. So this includes flexible ways of data collection, data analysis, and either through in-house students or volunteers. So please, I would appeal to the people who have joined us today, if you are part of an organization, educational campus, or even an industry per se, please reach out to us. We can come up with a customized plan to understand the carbon emissions that are coming out from your premise or campus. and optional credits in this case can be provided to students. So, this can become a wholesome activity where not only are they learning something, but that is also becoming some sort of a career supporting upskill for them, as Dr. Karve mentioned earlier. So, okay, on that note, we also had PKC's PI, Dr. Ajit Kembavi, joined the talk. So I'll see if he's still online. Professor, would you like to say something, share your thoughts today? Just a minute. I think you're on mute.
Enjoyed the talk. It was most appropriate, and it also tells us about simple actions which could be taken by individuals and by society, institutions, which will help the matter very much. And particularly good is the app which tells you what is your own carbon contribution. And I believe that we should keep a track of what we are doing and also make other people conscious of it. Thank you very much, Dr. Karve. It was a very nice experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, great. So thank you, Dr. Priyadarshini, again for joining us for the talk. Thank you all the participants, audience who joined us, who asked these interesting questions. Hope we all learned something today on the International Earth Day. So best wishes to all of you, and we can conclude the session now. Thank you all. Oh, wait. I think we need to take the screenshot. Yes. So I would request all of you to please start your video. We would quickly take some screenshots. Can other participants please turn on their videos? I think I have. Okay. Now can you try, please? We had disabled the feature earlier. Okay. Perfect. Sheetal, are you also taking a few?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. Thanks all for joining today. Have a lovely evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.